It's just not the,
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm Tamala Tolton, for you guys that don't know, the Chief of Staff for the Office of the Tenant Advocate. Unfortunately, due to an unforeseen emergency, Johanna Shreve will not be able to be with us today. So yeah, we're used to her being here every year, but so you guys are gonna have to deal with me, right, today. Hopefully I'll do her justice. We'll see. But it's been a long time since we've had an in-person tenant summit. I think Ramona said 6 years. One of our staff people. Has it been 6?
Well, it was a long time.
I think it was, I want to say 4 years since the pandemic and everything has happened. Lots has changed since then. You know, political shifts and all kinds of things. But one thing that has remained constant: tenants in DC are resilient, resourceful, and determined to be heard. That's for sure. Yes. This year's theme, Let's Make Good Trouble, draws from the late Congressman John Lewis, who reminded us that hope and optimism are essential when we push for change. That's exactly what today is about, arming you with tools, updates, and strategies to strengthen tenant associations, protect your rights, and amplify your voices. You'll also have a chance today to connect with city partners and community-based organizations, because none of us can do this work alone. When tenants are informed and united, real progress follows. So thank you all for showing up today, taking out time from, I'm sure, all of your busy schedules, and for, doing what you do on a daily basis. Let's have a powerful, productive day together. And yes, let's make good trouble. Good trouble. Let's make good trouble. Before we move into the program, it's my pleasure to introduce a true friend and champion of tenants. Please join me in welcoming Chairman R.White, Chair of the DC City Council Committee, who has been a steadfast advocate for safe, affordable, and equitable housing across all 8 wards. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Tamla, and to the OTA team, and good morning to everybody. It has been a while since the last time. I'm glad I looked at my calendar, because I would have drove to where? Wasn't it Gallaudet Gallaudet, right? So I'm glad I looked at my calendar and didn't go to the wrong place. But it's good to be back in person, and this is an example, just one example, of why I am so grateful for Director Shreve, who is just a powerhouse, and for the OTA team. For such a small agency, they have a big impact. And I was talking to one woman this morning who said, I don't live in DC, but Ms. Shreve called me and said, I need you to help. And I said, so you did what the rest of us do. You don't bother fighting knowing you're going to lose. You just say yes, right? That's what we do. That's the type of fighter we need for our tenants. And I can tell you, as somebody at the helm, as the chair of the housing committee, as a native Washingtonian, as somebody who grew up in a family struggling with the cost of housing, that we need folks who are going to fight for our city, and we need folks who are going to make the hard choices. So I'm not going to talk to you very long, but I want to deliver a couple messages, one about where we are, one about where we're going. And so I'm a politician and my dad's a preacher, so like, you always think that's a bad combination for being brief, but I am brief. So, I want to start by thanking OTA, what my team and I have done, and I want to really, give just tremendous thanks because he's here in person. Sean Cuddy-High, my deputy committee director. This brother works. So under his leadership and the leadership at OTA, we've been visiting. When people call me and complain about the conditions of their housing, we often go out to see it in person. And because that tells a different story, it gives me a more level view. But we don't go by ourselves. We have the Office of Building, what's it called now? Department of Building, thank you, Department of Buildings, and OTA and the Attorney General's office come with us, so we're all seeing the same things. And Cristobal and Elise, they are always there. They beat me there. And we try to solve these issues with all the right people in place. So I want you all to know, not only are they working with you in the office, but they're out in the community with me nonstop. But we're in a tough situation right now in DC. I'm not shy about my age. I'm 43, right? So I was young in our really difficult financial times, but I remember them. And now I'm, by God's grace, a member of the DC Council, and there are some things that I'm seeing that make me really nervous about where we are and whether or not we're really wrapping our heads around where we are. Our economy is not in good shape right now in DC. We owe more in our bills than we have coming in, and any of us who manage households know that that's not a good recipe, right? We have not recovered. Our downtown has not recovered from COVID-19, which shifted how and where people work. And now we have this crazy person as president who is not just hurting us politically in our home rule. And thank you to everybody who's been in these streets fighting, because we have got to stand up and fight right now. I tell people, I might die, but I'm going to die on my feet. But he has had an impact on our economy. People regionally, they don't want to go downtown when you got military going around and you might get snatched up off the street. And then internationally, this is not a hospitable place. So our economy is in tough shape. The deputy mayor for Planning and Economic Development met with me 2 days ago and said, Robert, I've officially gotten word that the 5 major housing lenders have all said they will not lend for housing projects in DC right now. Which doesn't mean there's nowhere else to get money, but it means it's a lot harder. What I worry about as somebody who my dad and all of his siblings rented, right? And we chased rents, which is why if you ask me where I'm from in DC, I'll tell you where my family house is from uptown. But we moved every year or two based on the rent. We have to be careful and conscious that we don't do things that make it more expensive for housing in DC. If the harder it is to get lending, the more it's going to cost, and that money is ultimately going to come to us in the form of rent or home purchases. And so I try to tell people, if I'm honest, right? No politician, no person who has to get elected or reelected wants to say the tough news, the honest news, but you got to say there's no easy out right now, all right? There's no magic wand. And I think about the decisions that my family and folks in my community had to make, and I think a lot of us probably grew up in similar circumstances, where you have some people who see the tough times and they make the tough decisions, and you have some folks, often in our families, I know they're in mine, who see the tough times, and then we're gonna put something in the baby's name, and let that work the way it does for a while, and then maybe we see an advertisement where we can get a new car and it sounds good, and we don't think about what does that mean 2 years from now when the repo man comes, and we make some bad decisions, not really being honest with ourselves about where we are. So I always want to level with people that those are our 2 paths right now. We can put something in the baby's name. We can say, hey, that's a good lease on a car. I'm thinking about the Commander Stadium. I'm not sure why, when we're in a deficit, we're paying billions of dollars for a stadium for people who can afford to build it out of their own pocket. Like, these are the types of decisions that are setting up the folks who come behind us or us in 5-10 years. And we got to be mindful. So I can't go into the community and say, look, we got to make hard decisions on housing, and then have the council and the mayor say, but we're going to pay for a stadium. I look crazy, right? So I'm trying to do both. I'm telling you, we got a lot of tough housing decisions in front of us, and we are making a mistake in paying money we don't have for a stadium. And I just want us all to be clear about where we are right now. So 2 things going forward, and this is how I'll round it out. One, as chair of the Housing Committee, and again, somebody who grew up with unstable housing. I went to a different school every single year for the first 5 years of school because we moved, which meant I went to a different school. I am working to stabilize our economy so that we are building more housing. If we have a population that's growing and a housing market that's shrinking, that means the cost of housing gets more expensive. So I'm trying to make the hard decisions. There are no perfect decisions, no fairy dust, nothing in front of us. But we're also saying, well, we can't continue to keep the status quo, right? There's not enough opportunities for people to move up. Building conditions are not getting better. Many people want to buy, but it just costs more and more and more. And often landlords are taking too much advantage of tenants. So we've got to be focused on tenants' rights as well. So we have the second vote on the Rental Act, which is maybe the least favorite thing I've ever had to pass, coming up in 2 weeks. And there'll be a lot of people taking shots at me. I want you to know I'm always going to make the hard decision. I'm going to do what I believe is best, even when it's not easy. But we're not stopping there. In the fall, under Sean's leadership and the leadership of my team, we are going to be working on a series of bills focused on tenant protections, things like utility billing and utility fees. Because years ago, when Pepco and Exelon merged, they said this is going to, stabilize rates. My rates aren't stabilized, right? Like my Pepco bill and gas bill are crazy. And often the utility fees, landlords are charging these outrageous utility fees all the way down to like internet in the common area. That's not fair to people. You got to be clear with people about what you're charging them, right? And whether or not that you can't make money off and claim that it's utility fees. So we're going to continue to do work like that to protect our tenants. Building conditions is something that we are squarely focused on and working on legislation. And we're going to keep working to prop up this agency, Office of Tenant Advocate, that is working. In this most recent budget that goes into effect at the beginning of next month, we were able to secure their litigation attorney, get them some money for tech upgrades so that it's easier to get in contact with them. And, they got this beautiful new space. We want them to continue to work well and efficiently. But I want you to know that we're going to keep working. We're going to keep fighting. I hope you all will continue to call on us about the issues that you're seeing, about where you need help, and frankly, where you think I'm missing it. Because we are trying to get this right. I grew up here. Now I got little girls, and I want them to grow up here. And so for everybody who stopped me today to say, it's tough, but this is my home, and I'm staying here, I want you to know that I'm with you, and we're going to keep working on this. So thank you to everything that each of you are doing. While you're clapping, give it up for the Office of the Tenant Advocate and the work that they are doing. Because they are here, I want to please give it up for the coalition. I know CNHED was tough, but now they go by the coalition. But they are doing an incredible job to make sure we continue to build housing. And for my part, I'm going to keep working on your behalf as well. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you to OTA for putting this together.
So first, that was great. Thank you, Councilmember White. Someone lost their lunch ticket already. So if you could just check to make sure you have it, and if it's you, just raise your hand and Christopher will bring it to you. And I have a couple more, it's yours. Okay. Right here, with the gray and black right here. And then I have a couple more housekeeping things. We started a little bit late. We started 30 minutes late, to be exact. And so we're just going to push everything back 30 minutes, if that's okay with everybody, right? Because we don't want to miss out on any content. We want everybody to be able to go to their legal clinic meetings and all of the things. So we're going to just push back 30 minutes. In your bag, everyone has note cards. You also have an ink pen. If there's a question for any of the panelists, just take a note card. Make sure you put your email address there, because in case they don't have time to answer or address your question here, we'll email you with a response within the week. But once you've filled out your note card, just hold it up, and one of the OTA staffers or volunteers in the OTA shirts will come by and get your note cards and bring it up so we can have your questions answered. And if you plan to attend the legal clinic or the elderly and disabled registration clinic, please make sure to sign up for a time slot at the front. They were right next to the registration table, okay? And I think that's it. Just please don't lose your red ticket. You need those for your lunch, and I don't want anybody to, have one missing. All right, and now. Yes, put it behind your name tag so that you won't lose it. Okay, and so now we'll start with the first panel.
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah,
Is my mic on?
your mic is on.
Hi, can everybody hear me? Great. I okay. I'll start up here. Okay, everybody can still hear me? Great. Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for being here. I want to thank Councilmember White and Sean and the council members' great staff for your support, budget-wise and otherwise, in your engagement with the Office of Tenant Advocate, the Chief Tenant Advocate, and her policy team, and everybody really does appreciate it. So thank you very much, and thanks for being here. Welcome everybody to this session entitled Crunch Time, How the Federal Budget Affects You. By way of understatement, this has been an interesting and unusual year in terms of the budget, both federally and for the district. Fortunately, we have an expert panel who I'm going to call up to the desk now to help sort this out. I will do introductions briefly, but yes, everybody come up, please. And as they're coming up, I'll say a word about logistics. We have 1 hour, one and a quarter hours for this session, 75 minutes. So each of our presenters will have about 15 minutes to make their remarks. We'll save some time for follow-up comments that our panelists might want to make. And then we're going to save as close to half an hour as possible to take your questions. Everybody should have an index card in their packet. If you think of a question at any time during the program, please write your question on a card and raise your hand. And during this session, somebody will be coming around to pick those up. Joey's going to help me organize questions. And let's see. With that, I will now introduce our panel in order of their presentations. Sonia Acosta is Senior Policy Analyst at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. And she's going to be addressing, I believe, sort of the big picture on the big, beautiful bill, which is a tax reduction, a federal bill measure, which was passed, and also the proposed federal budget. Noelle Porter is Director of Government Affairs at the National Housing Law Project, and she's going to be presenting an overview of the budget and the continuing resolution, as I understand it.
Absolutely, but I'm also far more proud of organizing here in the district with my neighbors in a Brookfield property.
Okay. And everybody, by the way, please read we have a very talented, very expert, very smart panel here, and we have complete bios in the program, so please read those. And then finally, last but not least, is Steve Gaudet. He's president and CEO of the coalition, which formerly known as the
Coalition for Nonprofit Housing.
Thank you.
Way too long.
And they do excellent work in terms of working with really tenants and also affordable housing providers as well to make rental housing as affordable as possible in the district. So I'm going to take a seat and throw this over to Sonia to start us out.
Good morning, everyone. Great to be with you on a Saturday morning. My name is Sonia Acosta. I'm a senior policy analyst at Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, which is a policy and research institute where we promote policies at the federal and state level so that everyone can thrive. My work specifically focuses on federal rental assistance programs, expanding them, improving them, so that everyone can afford a stable home. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about this big bill that the administration and Congress passed earlier in the year. They call it the One Big Beautiful Bill, but I will not say that again because it's not beautiful, it's terrible. And they packed a lot in there that will do a lot of harm. And so I'm just going to talk about a few pieces of that. That's kind of one part of the federal spending landscape, and then Noelle is going to talk about another piece that's ongoing that needs to happen every year. What happened with this bill was kind of a special process, and so they could only do certain things in it. But what they did was they took away food assistance from people. They're going to take away health care from people. They are giving tax breaks to the wealthy. And they're taking away things like energy credits so that we can, so we can't invest in solar and wind energy as much, and our energy costs will remain high. So I'm just going to talk about kind of what was in that bill, how it might impact people, and then think about what that means too for local, well, state and DC's governments in terms of their budget and what they now will have on their plates because of what the federal government decided to do. So one big part of this bill was that it took food assistance away from people by cutting the SNAP program, or food stamps. So approximately 4 million people in a typical month will lose some or all of their SNAP food benefits once these changes are fully implemented. And the timeline for these changes, it's fairly long. Some of it, there aren't concrete deadlines, so when folks might feel this can really depend, and we won't feel all the impacts of this bill for quite a number of years. So the way that they cut food assistance is they added red tape due to expanded work requirements. So folks will now have to prove that they work a certain number of hours, and if they can't, that means that they can only get 3 months of food assistance in a 3-year period. They'll be cut off. And they're also changing who these work requirements applies to. And so it now applies to older adults aged 55 through 64, as well as parents with children aged 14 and older. And those folks used to be exempt, but not anymore. There were also other exemptions on this work requirements piece for veterans, people experiencing homelessness, youth who recently aged out of foster care, and those exemptions are also gone. So in the district, what this means, just for these kind of work requirements piece, is that about 14,000 residents could lose assistance. They also added some restrictions to SNAP eligibility for immigrants, ending eligibility for refugees, people who were granted asylum, survivors of domestic violence and sex trafficking. Those folks will no longer be able to receive any food assistance. And then another aspect, none of this is going to be good news, I'm so sorry. It is, aren't you amazed by its beauty already? Yes. So another aspect is that benefits are going to be reduced, right? Just the amount of assistance that you get through SNAP will be reduced. It slashes federal funding. So what that means is then states are going to have to pick up the bill. So that means the district's government is going to have to pay more if we're going to just keep kind of the level of assistance. And so that obviously is then going to eat into the budget, which then makes it more difficult for states and DC to do more. So we estimate that it could force between $16 million and $48 million in new costs for DC. So that's on the food assistance side. In terms of health coverage, it cuts about $1.1 trillion for Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act marketplaces, the ACA marketplaces. So there's kind of very technical things, and I'm not like a healthcare expert, so some of this I really had to dumb down just for myself to even make sense of it. But about roughly 15 million people will lose health coverage through all the different changes in this bill. So some of that is because of cuts to Medicaid funding, because of cuts to the ACA marketplace, because of interactions between various policies within the bill, and because the bill doesn't extend tax credits that make the marketplace, the ACA marketplace, more affordable. So because of all of those things, we're going to have millions of people losing health coverage across the country. Again, they impose work requirements on folks who have Medicaid, meaning that if you can't prove it, you don't have the documentation, or maybe your hours fall down, then you could be at risk of losing Medicaid. It increased costs for folks, both in the ACA marketplace and on Medicaid. And we're estimating that about 31,000 DC residents could lose health coverage because of some of these changes. Another big aspect of the bill is that it cuts taxes for the wealthy. And there are tax cuts, you know, kind of just generally, but when you compare what someone who makes $1 million is gonna get back compared to a normal person, it's like $90 to $80,000, right? It's not going to be helpful for the average person. And cutting taxes for the wealthy then reduces the funding we have for the federal investments that we need to help people and to strengthen our communities. So one example is that a tax cut for one millionaire could instead pay for health insurance for 4 people. If we didn't have that tax cut, we could help people get their health insurance. Another aspect of the bill that I want to flag is that it does cut, like I mentioned, clean energy tax credits. And so that's going to raise the cost of installing wind and solar energy, which will lead to canceling projects and increasing our energy costs, right? Because solar and wind are the most affordable long term, but you need kind of that upfront infrastructure to get it going. And so there's a lot of different pieces in this bill, and they will be implemented at different times. And so, right, you might not see any impact either for yourself or folks you know who benefit from these programs, or just kind of broadly in the community for a while. But in about 5 years or so, I think folks will really start to see it. That also means that, you know, if something changes, some of these things can be rolled back, right? So I guess that's the little bit of hope, is that folks can still continue to push. We don't have any members of Congress to call about that, but you know, we know how to get things done still. I will say that there wasn't very much in this bill that was directly related to housing. There was some money for the low-income housing tax credit to help develop additional housing, but all of these cuts will make life less affordable than it already is, especially for people with the lowest incomes. And then again, by reducing tax revenues for the federal government, we have fewer resources for like full support on housing, on funding for rental assistance, on funding for expanding the supply of affordable housing, all of those things. And it shifts, they're really trying to shift the costs of all of these essential services to the state governments, which will eat into the budget and reduce funding available for things like eviction diversion, emergency rental assistance, and developing affordable housing. So even if it seems kind of big, it will have really major impacts here locally as well. So that's all my bad news for the moment. And then I guess I'll turn it to Noelle to just pile on.
Thank you so much, Sonia. A couple of things just at this top. Sonia and I both work in federal government. There are a lot of acronyms, and I am about as guilty as anybody of just speed racing through these acronyms that I assume everyone else knows. So I'm gonna need y'all, if I say an acronym that doesn't mean something to you, or some of these words are weird, like what is an appropriation? Literally scream at me, what does that mean? So if I said CR, what does that mean? a continuing resolution. But this is a space, first of all, it is way too early for me to be dressed on a Saturday. I don't have kids. But this is a space, we gotta wake this up, and we're gonna talk about hard things. And I'm gonna talk about it in a way that I'm sure sometimes forgets that you don't know what I'm talking about. So if you hear a word, a phrase, an acronym, just scream, we don't know what does that mean? And I will stop, because trust me, I'm really bad about this. So we're gonna talk about appropriations. What does that mean? Honestly, who knows? The federal government's process of developing its spending, most folks call the budget process. But if you think about a budget is how much money you have to spend. So that is one part of it. But then when you guys look at your monthly expenses, you say, I gotta have this amount for groceries, and I need this amount for rent, and I need this amount for medicine, and I need this amount for my wardrobe, and it goes on and on and on. That's appropriations. That's when you say, we have this much money, and we're gonna spend it block by block, right? And so we are at the very end of an appropriations cycle. The federal government's money runs out on September 30th every year, and October 1st is the start of the new fiscal year. And so by September 30th, what we would expect of the adults in the room, our federal government, our lawmakers, would be that they were reaching a deal to get us ready for our spending for the coming year. So everything we're talking about here today is for fiscal year 26, which starts on October 1st. And so you guys have a handout, or if you didn't get a chance to grab it, it's on the side wall. It gives you some kind of like detached details about where the federal budget process is, and it's a bunch of numbers and they don't make much sense. And so I'm going to try to walk through some of that and talk about where we are and where we're headed with the federal budget. And then it might still feel really overwhelming, but what I'm told is that the panels get much more local as you move through the day, so I think it'll become more relevant too. So if you are looking at the handout, you'll see what you'll see the page shows what the House of Representatives has in their bill for spending, and it'll show a different amount or different amounts for what the Senate has in their bill. Every year, the House passes a spending bill that kind of showcases their priorities, and especially in a Republican House, it'll be low goals. We call the House bill the floor. It's going to be the worst of the worst, and we don't necessarily think that that's where we end up. And then the Senate bill is a ceiling. The Senate appropriators, or the folks who do this budget work, are a little bit more serious about federal government spending. And so when you see these numbers, just know that we're usually going to fall somewhere between the two, the House budget and the Senate budget, or the House appropriations and the Senate appropriations, but a little bit closer, historically, to the Senate number. Okay, so I'm going to walk through some of the accounts that I think are most relevant to housing spending and might be most relevant in your lives, and talk about sort of the prospects for fiscal year 26 and where we are right now. So overall HUD funding, the House bill, again, a floor, is very, very low. The House budget attempted to wipe out entire programs like HOME, which is money dedicated to building new affordable housing. So you may hear the administration tell you they want to make housing less expensive, they want to build more housing. They're not showing that in how they're proceeding. The House bill also severely underfunds Section 8 vouchers. And the broader spectrum of vouchers, for those of you who may be familiar with 202, which is housing for the elderly, or 811, which is housing for people with disabilities. And the House bill also significantly underfunds community development block grants, or CDBG, which is money that mayors and localities can use in a variety of flexible ways, including addressing homelessness, building new development, paying for legal aid funding, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the House bill, and again, it's a floor. The Senate bill is much more positive. I've told people I'll call it fine. The Senate bill keeps most of HUD's overall funding, just a slight decrease there. Some of that can be accounted for in spaces that we're not super concerned about. But the really important parts are these. The Senate bill funds vouchers at slightly less than renewable numbers. Everyone knows what renewable numbers are when it comes to vouchers? What does that mean? Thank you, guys. I need audience participation or I can't do this. We got to keep going. There wasn't Diet Coke. There's only coffee. I feel discriminated against. So renewable numbers are what it takes to say that every family across the country who currently has a voucher will continue to have that voucher moving forward. And one of the things that's tricky about understanding voucher funding is that anything that would be flat funding or the same amount of funding as last year is essentially a cut to housing funding, because what do housing costs keep doing? Going up. The rent is too damn high. Somebody said it. So, amen. So when housing costs keep going up, to renew the existing vouchers that we have across the country, the housing spending has to go up. And so even though this paper shows you that the Senate plan does increase that voucher spending, we still estimate it's a little bit short on renewals. And so if you, well, we don't have any representatives. Try to find a way to make good trouble. We are trying to convince Senate appropriators, especially, we're trying to convince the Senate right now to get a little bit closer to those renewable numbers to ensure that every family who has a voucher keeps that voucher. And so right now that number is a little bit concerning. I will just caution that HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development at the federal level, has ways that they assist PHAs across the country or public housing authorities. So we've got the DCHA here representing. Ways that they have special pots of money that they can allocate or move around to deal with what we call a shortfall when folks are not quite having adequate numbers for their renewals. And so while this number is a little bit low in the Senate, HUD has assured the federal government and has assured Congress that spending that money will still equate to enough renewables if we find all these couch cushion sort of pockets of additional money across the country. But one other caveat here is that under Biden, can we get remember him? Does he? Okay. But under Biden, during the COVID crisis, we issued a new pot of vouchers called emergency housing vouchers. And you may or may not know, if you are a voucher recipient, whether or not you have an emergency housing voucher, but those vouchers were designated as temporary. And the goal of those vouchers was for them to last for 10 years based on the spending. But what kept happening to housing costs? They kept going up. And so those vouchers now have a cliff and they will expire in the middle of next year in a way that is very dangerous for the 58,000 families across the country who have EHVs. And so the other thing we want to tell you is that the House budget and the Senate budget both have some mechanisms to fix that problem and to make sure that the families who receive emergency housing vouchers are transferred onto a Section 8 voucher or receive public housing funding or find another solution. But those solutions aren't quite clear yet. And so that's another advocacy thing we're really pushing for with the federal government, is to make sure that we don't lose those 58,000 emergency housing vouchers. And I know that if Sonia and I had our way, we'd make sure they became permanent. And so we really have to watch just how close these federal numbers are going to be. And I'm sure in later presentations, you'll hear from DC advocates about how they're preparing to make sure that families who receive vouchers in the district are going to keep their vouchers and stay housed in the district. The Senate bill does maintain the home funding. As I said earlier, that home funding, it's all capital letters and it stands for something, I don't know what. And that funding is for building housing. The Senate bill gets much closer and keeps those numbers at a good level. Hopefully that's the money we can spend here in the district. And the Senate bill also keeps CDBG money in good shape. Both the House and Senate bill are low on public housing, specifically on public housing operating. And I don't have a rosy thing to say about this. Public housing, in its foundations and in its origins, was devastated by the racism that marks the way that we serve American citizens. And over decades of time, that federal sort of abdication of responsibility for public housing has led to a situation where the conditions in public housing are abhorrent across the country. And we face a significant backlog for public housing funding to actually get those properties back into habitable places that serve their tenants well. The vision for public housing was always that it would be an oasis, that it would be a protected community space. And right now that's not true. And so when the federal government continues to defund and to sort of edge out public housing funding, they'll blame it on the blight that public housing has become. But that blight is the result of abdication, and it's the result of racism. And so I will tell you that we believe in my organization, I know that I would assume my panelists and many people in this room believe that public housing is an essential component of community housing, and that it is the original social housing. If you hear people talking about new movements for social housing, public housing is the root of that. And until we return to our federal roots of championing public housing as a necessary component of our infrastructure, we really are abandoning tenants. And so we will continue to fight the good fight to not only keep enough funding in the public housing budget, but to restore the dignity of public housing and to really return to a new era of public housing. And so we're looking at these budgets. The House budget, as we said, very low, a little bit underwhelming and scary. The Senate budget, fine, we'll take it. But what will happen to get those two in sync and to get us ready for September 30th? Well, that's where more bad news comes in. We really don't have a fun opening for this morning. But the really good news about today is that this place is packed with passionate tenants who want to fight for their own rights and passionate advocates who want to help. And so all I can tell you is that hopefully we're turning this over to more people who will give you better news about how to fight for the things that you deserve, the rights that you have, and the protections that we need. And if Councilmember White was still here, I would say we'll still be fighting for TOPA and the tenant opportunity to purchase, which is a civil right that the district needs. But I know he's fighting tough battles. It's just something personal for me I'm feeling strongly about. So what are the next steps to get to September 30th? I can tell you right now, Congress isn't going to be able to get it together. The bill's not going to pass. We're not going to be able to make these meet. So we have to implement what's called a CR. A continuing resolution. A continuing resolution is something that takes the government numbers, the federal funding numbers from the previous year and carries them over or makes them flat funded. But what about housing? What does housing mean for flat funding? It's a cut because the housing costs keep going up. So if we are in a continuing resolution or a CR for too long, we won't have adequate funding for housing. And so what's going to happen is we're absolutely facing a bill that can't pass by September 30th. And so we'll need a continuing resolution just to keep the government funded. And they can do that in two ways. One way is a short-term continuing resolution, probably about 2 months. That's what Congress is talking about right now through the end of November. And that short-term CR will fund the government at flat levels for 2 more months while Congress tries to work it out. With those 2 more months, most things will stay flat funded, but we know we can survive 2 months. And then there will be what's called an anomaly. What's an anomaly? An anomaly is an extreme outside of the regular budget that we have to address regardless of whether or not we're in a CR. And so for vouchers specifically, there will be an anomaly to make sure that vouchers stay funded. So vouchers will be secure through that short-term CR. If we face a long-term CR or a year-long CR, there will be multiple anomalies. So we will have anomalies for 202 and 811 and for public housing and for project-based rental assistance. And so we have to prepare for that reality. It might even be a little bit better funding if we're in a year-long CR than if we get a final bill passed by Congress. So it's a little bit tricky in there, but either way, we want to keep the government open and funded. The only other option here, if Congress can't reach an agreement on a short-term CR or a long-term CR, is a government shutdown. And district residents know government shutdowns better than anybody. It is very, very likely right now that we are facing a shutdown. One of the things that is hard to follow is President Trump's, I want to say logic, but that sounds insane. And so on any given day, he is signaling to the Republicans in Congress to do a new thing. And because they are feckless and afraid, they change day to day to do his thing. And so the Democrats have a really hard time making an agreement with people who are going to have a new challenge the next day. And so if they can't come to this agreement, the government may shut down. And that is a desperate situation for all of us. Sonia and I both have to play a game very regularly where we estimate how long that could be. I don't know. The crazies have taken over. I hope it could be just a few days, maybe a week. But if a shutdown is happening, we will need our council members, our mayor, our Eleanor Holmes Norton's to just speak up and speak out, and we will need you all to speak up and speak out because we cannot afford to operate in a situation where the federal government is not serving its people. So come September 30th, something's gonna change. We don't know exactly what yet, but hopefully this is enough foundation for you all to know, and I apologize, I think I went vastly over my time.
Just a couple minutes.
Okay, hopefully I stole some from Sonia, so I am gonna pass it to Steve.
But Steve looks anxious. So let's get him. Can we save the question? We will have the Q&A.
And I'll try to get through this brief. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, DC. Good morning, Taha. Clearly, I didn't get the too early to dress memo. I wish I did that, but I do that to honor you all. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been asked to talk about how everything that they have shared kind of translates into DC, but because I'm DC, because you're our constituency and our family, I do have a couple of housekeeping comments I want to make before I quickly say who the coalition is for people who may not know. First of all, I'm sorry that Councilman White had to dash, but I'm sure we were the first of probably 10 things he had to do today. But we've had a very good working relationship with Councilman White, even before he became chairman of the Housing Committee, but certainly since then. And we are in a really tough season of tough choices and tough decisions. One of the things that's really important is that we just continue to advance our aspirations and our values despite disagreements. In many ways, DC is having to model what should be happening in the nation as we go through this legislative season that we're currently facing. I also want to shout out who you'll hear from later, the coalition's Chief Housing Officer, Maya Brennan, who has been working tirelessly through this season. For those who don't know, the coalition, formerly the Coalition for Nonprofit Housing and Economic Development, is a coalition of 90 nonprofits, 40 mission-driven for-profits who work on homelessness prevention, affordable housing, workforce development, business development, and more. We primarily exist to advocate with the mayor and the DC Council to invest in housing programs and job programs and more. And I want to shout out what I'll call the corridor of care outside, because many of those organizations that also support you are coalition members, Housing Counseling Services, Carescent, and other. And lastly, I want to recognize two of our legacy resident leaders, Juanita McKenzie and Taha Chavez. They've led our resident leadership team for at least the last 15 years. And have helped so many residents not only understand housing as an issue in an industry, but they've helped many residents go prepare and testify before the city council. When you watch a housing hearing, you will see resident after resident. Many of these people were trained and educated by Juanita and Taha, so I have to shout that out. I also do want to lift Johanna again up in prayer. I've known Johanna since 1981. We have worked in crisscross ways through my time at HUD and the White House, as well as my time with the council and with the mayor here. And I just think she is the embodiment of tenacity and value and principle. So we do wish that whatever she's dealing with, that everything goes well. I want to commend you, and I want to commend you as tenant leaders who care. And I say this through a larger lens. I've been doing this work for almost 50 years. I've run 6 nonprofits, 3 national, 3 local nonprofits. And through my national, and I'm on several national boards now, and through my national boards, I get a sight into other cities and how their tenants are engaged. And when I'm traveling around the country and I'm listening to my counterparts talk about the challenges they have, one of the challenges they always talk about is resident engagement and tenant advocacy. And I listen to them describe their problems, and I find myself being really quiet and saying, I ain't got that problem in DC. Our tenants are active and they are engaged and involved. And so I want to thank OTA, because OTA is a framework for the engagement and the involvement that we have. I want to encourage you to continue to show up. When I took this job, some of you will remember my predecessor, Bob Pullman. He was an adored leader in this city. And Bob was great in helping me transition in the job. But no matter what he was briefing me on, he always finished with, and Steve, whoever shows up the loudest at the end gets the money. And I'm like, Bob, is it that simple? And he goes, it's that simple. And it's a little more complex now. We not only have to show up, we have to have solutions. We have to have ideas. We need to be willing to negotiate, all of which, all this training that you get from OTA and some other groups in the quarter prepare, and the coalition prepare us to do. But I just want to encourage you throughout this process that you continue to show up. So I want to frame in my remarks a couple of things. One, the time we're in. You've heard it from the other panelists. I want to frame it a little, maybe broadly. I do want to highlight why I believe that in the midst of all of this, we are fortunate, maybe more fortunate than other places. And I have a couple of asks for you at the end. So my fellow panelists have said it. I'm going to say it maybe a little more directly. We're in a time in this country where we are victim blaming, if not victim demonizing. And I don't want to refer to you all or people in need as victims, but we are cannibalizing people who actually the systems and the priorities and the values of this country have put in marginalized or challenged positions. And it is because of the fact that we are prioritizing wealth over humanity and decency and fairness. And so we have to be resolved in validating each other and knowing that we have a right to this country as well. We have a right to be able to stay in the city as well. And we're also dually challenged to be responsible for carving and crafting our own way forward. So it's a cutting both ways kind of thing. We got to show up a little differently. We've got to, and that's going to get to my last ask in this. We're in a very polarized time. And one of the ways that it shows up, which gets back to the issues that my fellow panelists have brought up around spending and spending priorities, is one of the things that creeps in that is not as evident around this polarization and this marginalization and demonization of people in need is funding fatigue. And it doesn't just happen nationally, it happens locally, it happens with the financial sector, it happens with philanthropy. We've been oriented to look up and say, we've been doing this a long time. Or why aren't people in better places? Or how can we sustain this? And we have to push back and reject that and just stay the course and be able to be visible and vigilant. And so I want to go through this list as I am asked to talk about how what's been described at the federal level is going to translate down in DC. In the White House proposed budget, it would end federal housing authority programs and transition them to the states. This would not just cause chaos during the transition, but they would also have advanced plans to cut funding levels as well. Generally, whenever you transfer something, you cut it at the same time because you hope that the cut gets lost in the transition. The House and Senate budget proposals do not go as far as the White House request does, but still public housing is especially at risk. Public housing is one of those things that I think has some connection to funding fatigue. I think that there's been a narrative that is involved that, you know, we've cared for these people for 60, 70 years through this program, and we haven't seen the kind of changes. You know, and I just need to say this. For a long time, I will admit that I got it wrong. For a long time, I believed that people, that tenants, that under-resourced people, if we could just make programs more effective, education, job training, and more, if we could just make policies that were fair and laws that were just, that we would make a deep dent in these conditions. And then I had an epiphany in this job a couple of years ago that even if we did all of that, there's not enough room in the economy for everyone to go. And it is just a false front that if we just got better education, which I believe in, and if we had better, more effective job training and so forth, that this would just solve our problems. And so the fact that there's not enough room in the economy for many of our under-resourced residents means that we have to invest in these programs to care for people. And it goes beyond protected classes. So what's protected classes? Seniors, people with disabilities, children, and the chronically mentally ill are typically defined as protected classes. And we should never debate taking care of them. But what I also realize is that under-resourced people are really, in reality, operationally a protected class as well, which is what all of the programs and the efforts that we're making are intended to stand up. The big, beautiful bill opened more opportunities. So on the Housing Authority side, that is one thing that we want to be watchful for. Do we actually get the devolution of federal funding and a transfer to the states, and being mindful that if that happens, there will probably be proposed cuts. There will be proposed cuts even if it doesn't happen, but I think it will be trickier if it does. On the housing supply side, it's a mixed bag. There are well-connected lobbyists who really like the low-income housing tax credit, and we kind of expect that that program will be okay because it gives tax breaks to wealthy people who invest in affordable housing. But the good news is it does provide an infusion of money into affordable housing projects. If more of the funds, and specifically about access to housing in neighborhoods, are cut, for example, the DC1 funds from the Pro Housing Program, a competitive grant to help regions and add more housing in high-cost areas, but the House and Senate both propose a cut for that. Homeless assistance dollars would go up in both the House and Senate, and lead remediation looks like they might stay stable. But the U.S. Interagency Council on the Homelessness would get less or zero funds to make homeless prevention work more possible. And then the last two things are the Senate budget proposal, although a lot better than the House, would keep public housing repair stable, but the House would cut it. The Senate would increase some forms of tenant-based assistance, but the House also would make cuts. One of the things that we think are important also to track related to this is economic mobility programs and fair housing. And apparently they look stable, or get a modest increase in Senate, but cuts in the House. And then the federal bills not just threaten not just tenants' welfare and cities' work to address barriers to housing, they also threaten to put tenants and housing providers against each other. That's something that we're going through locally with TOPA reform and other things. And it's a challenging time. I mean, you know, the district leads the nation per capita investments in the Housing Production Trust Fund. We've invested $1.5 billion over the last 10 years in that program, and it's still not enough. We're still not meeting the need. We're still not closing the gap. The post-pandemic economic conditions and our compassionate maintenance of some of the eviction prevention and emergency rental assistance practices have really put our housing providers through rent arrears and other things in a really difficult juxtaposition to each other. And what it's going to mean is that there's probably going to need to be some really tough choices as we close out this legislative season. As we all know, TOPA, I mean, if you don't know, TOPA is under discussion right now. There are proposals to reform TOPA, We would argue maybe repeal TOPA, and we're working hard to make sure that we provide some relief to our housing providers, some catalyst to our housing investors, but not at the expense of tenant rights. And I really need you to stay tuned over this next week, because the final vote on the rental act is going to happen, and Wednesday. And this is where we need to go back to what Bob Pullman said, is that whoever shows up is going to get the attention. So, I mean, that's a quick rundown on how we see things unfolding. And so I just want to finish with why we, I think, are fortunate. We have a mayor who cares. We have a mayor who cares. We have a council. We have a council who cares, and it is evidenced by decades of sustained progressive policy and nationally leading investments. It doesn't mean that we agree on everything or every approach, but if you look at this dollars and cents on the table, our investments in affordable housing, homeless programs, and others lead the nation per capita. On our Housing Production Trust Fund, only New York has more dollars. They have a gazillion more people to care for than we do. And the reason that I'm saying we are fortunate is, if this devolution to the states occurs, if they disband agencies, if they defund programs and actually transfer them, we have a city. When the coalition launched the Housing for All campaign, what must be about 14 years ago now, at that time, there was no public awareness that we had an affordable housing crisis in DC. And let me define that. There were no newspaper articles on affordable housing. No one ran for office with affordable housing as a priority. There were no council hearings on housing or affordable housing. There were no new programs being launched. Now we fast forward through your work, through our work together, and 2 weeks don't go by where there's not an article in the paper about housing. No one runs for office now without talking about affordable housing. We've launched at least 5 to 7 new programs during this 14-year period. We lead the nation. So to say that we are not well positioned, if we have to resolve these issues more locally because of a retreat from the federal government, we are well positioned in that we have raised public awareness, we have built political will, and we have catalyzed over a decade of investments. And I'm not saying that we've reached the promised land. I want to be really clear about that. I'm not saying that it's perfect. But I do know this: when I travel and I'm with my counterparts in other cities and other states, and they talk about this devolution and what happens if it comes to their state or what happens if it comes to their city, they are petrified at what that means because of the lack of awareness, the lack of the will, and the lack of investment. So I'm not saying that we are everywhere where we need to be. I'm saying we are far better positioned if we have to handle this locally than many other cities in this country. So lastly, my 2 asks. I know that you're going to show up for housing. I know that you're going to show up to protect the most vulnerable. I know you're going to hold us accountable on treating housing as a human right. But I also want to encourage you to hold us equally accountable at creating paths to economic mobility for you, for your families, and for your neighbors. Affordability should be 2 forces meeting in the middle. It should be bringing down the cost of housing, having fair, effective policies, having programs that work, but it also should be individual and family incomes coming up, and the 2 should meet in the middle. And that way, not only are we stabilizing housing for all of our residents, we are also creating paths to the middle class. We are creating more platforms of dignity for people to live and care for themselves. And I have an undying faith in people. So I believe that we care for those who don't care for themselves and who can't care for themselves. And I also believe that we develop those who are capable of education, development, training, growth, and ultimately ownership of their own futures. And my other ask is, when I look at this, and I said I've been doing this work almost 50 years. I've been working in this issue through 7 presidents. Going back to Carter, I think that's 7. And I've never seen a time like this. And we do not believe that if we just wait out these next 3 years, that everything is going to go back to the way it is. We are in a protracted challenge for equality, for fairness, and justice. And I look around this room, and I see veteran soldiers in the fight. And I'm an old guy. And one of my jokes is when I'm trying to encourage young people to get involved is, I've saved the world 3 times already. It's somebody else's turn. And I know some of you may have some feeling of that as well. So my ask of you, I believe that the young people of this country have to claim the politics of this country. I believe we are dealing with a long-term movement or the rebirth of either the renaissance of an old or the rebirth of a new. And I believe that young people, so I want to encourage you, whether the young people are your children or your neighbors or someone else, I want to encourage you to get them involved in awareness and engagement and activism young, because I think we're going to be fighting this battle for a while. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all 3 panelists. We have, I think, about 15 minutes for Q&A. I'm told we don't have any questions written on cards, but I saw a couple of hands go up. So as folks think of questions, I'll be calling on you soon to ask a question. Oh, we have one. So if Joey's asking me to ask you if you have a card filled out to pass it to the end of the row, and he'll come pick it up. And in the meantime, do any of the panelists want to make any follow-up comments by way of bouncing off of a fellow panelist, or any, concluding?
I think I've gotten myself in enough trouble.
I will just follow up. Steve, you did a great job of kind of starting at the president's budget level. The president's budget is the part of this process that comes before the appropriations. Yesterday, I described it to someone as if Congress was Santa, the president's budget is Trump's letter to Santa asking for what he wants out of the spending. And so some of the propositions or proposals that Steve was talking about, especially the proposal to send a lot of housing funding back to the states, really are dead on arrival in Congress. And so just want to make sure we clarify that the budget numbers that we're talking about right now are the real conversation, and not some of the original proposals from the White House, although that's our long-term fight, is to make sure that they don't get traction on those desires that they have.
Okay, and I'm going to ask one question first, and then we'll go to the card, and folks who have questions want to raise their hands. So Nicole spoke about the couch money that the PSAs have, DCHA in the case of the district, and Steve spoke about public housing being most at risk in terms of the federal budget, and I'm wondering how, it's the good news item is the largest ever increase in LIHTC, I believe is a correct stat. Can you speak to the sort of the value added of that increase in LIHTC and what the opportunity costs might be in terms of it's a tax credit essentially to big developers, it's a low-income housing tax credit, and so it gives a tax incentive for housing providers to do affordability. If they do affordability, they get a comparable tax credit. I think the panelists can describe it better, but I think that's the gist of it. So does the question make sense in terms of the opportunity cost? What value added is there in terms of the infusion of affordability for that huge increase in LIHTC versus the opportunity costs in, say, public housing or otherwise?
Sure. So pretty good description. LIHTC is a credit that's issued by the IRS to developers. It's a tax incentive for big corporations to build housing that they at least will designate a certain percent of for a certain amount of time in an affordable range. What I will say about that is, from the perspective of my organization, from my personal perspective, that LIHTC housing is not affordable. It's certainly not deeply affordable. And so the other problem with the program is that it also doesn't have strong enough protections around the affordability restrictions that are required. So folks might have experience living in a LIHTC property that should have had 30 to 45 years of affordability, and the owners were able to opt out of that affordability at 15 years and move to market rate housing. And so while LIHTC is the country's largest source of affordable housing, it has too many loopholes, and it offers too much to developers to lack the protections that tenants need when they live in that housing. So while the district needs cash and the district needs investments, what I would say is that when LIHTC properties are being developed in this community, we have to fight even harder for the tenants' rights that should be attached to those buildings or should carry from the district in those properties.
I would just say that I agree, but how it works here in DC, LIHTC is one of a capital stack that most of our nonprofit developers use to develop housing. So LIHTC does have some affordability covenants or requirements to it. Most projects that are developed have LIHTC plus Housing Production Trust Fund, which has another, and this is the thing that's going to get debated this week, neither LIHTC nor Housing Production Trust Fund covenants cover everything that TOPA does. The reason, in fact, one of the reasons that we have TOPA layered is to get those additional protections. One of the things we will be debating and the council will be deciding this week is whether or not the covenants, whether TOPA covenants get rolled back because there's a tax credit covenant or a Housing Production Trust Fund covenant. And we're hoping that we'll get it right when the final vote is done. But most of our nonprofit developers use tax credits, but their tenant protections use LITCH, but they generally have, because of TOPA, and a little bit because of HPTF, they have protections that go beyond what LITCH provides.
And just
Vote is going to be Wednesday. The vote on the rental act is going to be Wednesday. Yes.
Thanks, Sean.
Yeah, this is Act 3 on the Act 2 or 3. Some provisions were addressed and decided upon at an earlier time in the legislative process, but it's because it's just so important, and also so many provisions, because in addition to TOPA in the Rental Act, there's also eviction provisions and proposals in that as well. And, you know, to the council's credit, they delayed vote on it because they really are trying to get it right. So I would just say this: you have till now to Wednesday to let your council members know your views on the Rental Act and the provisions that are in it, and whatever they are, I just encourage you to reach out to your council offices. And if you want information, if you want clarity on any of the provisions that are yet to be decided, Maya, who you will hear from later today, is our in-house guru on everything housing, but also everything Rental Act. So you can reach out to Maya, and she can walk you through what's yet to be decided. CoalitionDC.org. I still can't get used to the new name.
we're like the Ohio State.
It is thecoalitiondc.org.
Okay, I'm going to ask a few questions that folks wrote on cards. A number of them go to more of the DC budget than the federal budget. I have those cards. I promise that they will get asked in the next session, after the next session, which is focused on the DC budget. This might be a question that goes to a recommendation for a website, but what is the budget for different housing programs?
Like, what are the funding
I think
numbers?
I think the question is dollar. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so those are all in a bill, but our partners at the National Low Income Housing Coalition have a budget chart that lists out all of the numbers for each program for HUD as well as USDA, which isn't super relevant. But it will give you the numbers for the Senate bill, the House bill, the president's budget, and then fiscal year 2025. So you can kind of compare how much of an increase there was. So if you Google National Low Income Housing Coalition, or NLIHC budget chart, you should be able to find it. And that's probably the easiest way to find all those numbers.
Historical question. Did underfunding of public housing infrastructure begin under President Reagan?
Underfunding of public housing began the moment we created public housing.
Once it became for people with low incomes and wasn't desegregated anymore, that's when they started underfunding
And
it.
I'll add that LIHTC was sort of invented in the Reagan era.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Reagan
There's a
underfunded
shift in
everything,
the way-
but he didn't start this particular train.
Yeah, got it. Okay, does anybody, I do have a number of other good questions that I think will be well answered in the next session. Does anybody have a question they want to raise their hand and ask?
Well, this is affordable housing to the lowest max. That is that I heard or I read, might have been a television discussion, that either on the national level or the local level, that anybody found to go to prison for 30 days. I'd like to get a little information on that. Is that district, is that national, and what do you guys think?
I can respond on DC because the Bureau of Prisons actually reached out to us. I don't know what the current status was. What I do know is that the Bureau of Prisons was contacted and told that when sweeps were done, that residents would be brought to them and that they either found housing or would have to keep them. I don't know and maybe how that unfolded, but that was a momentary occurrence here in the district.
So it's both local and national because it is a direct result of the federal takeover of our city. But it is also a part of a trend to criminalize the experience of homelessness across the country. And I think that it's not the first of its kind, and it is certainly something we're going to have to be fighting for and against very, very rapidly. If folks are very passionate about homelessness issues, I would get familiar with the Cicero Institute. It's funded by billionaire Peter Thiel, and the goal is not to end homelessness for the people who are experiencing it. The goal is to take homelessness out of sight for the people who don't want to see it. And that effort will lead to increased criminalization across the country, and that effort is very influential in the current administration.
Yeah, I'll add that the Trump administration has put out what are known as executive orders, right? Directions to the agencies that are very much pushing that agenda of criminalizing people who are experiencing homelessness, institutionalizing them, forcibly institutionalizing them. And so it's directing different agencies to kind of look at how to implement that, and it's encouraging states to do that. And so that's also a very important piece of advocacy to think about here locally. How do we push our mayor? How do we push our city council to not do that? Because we know that that does not solve anything and makes it so much harder for people who are experiencing homelessness to connect with services, to connect with the housing that they need.
Prison is also way more expensive than the rent.
It's so much more expensive, so many better solutions than locking people up or forcing them into institutionalized care.
I think we have,
That's right. They're building a ballroom and we could just be housing everyone.
and the golden something else, but anyway. I think time for one more question, and I think this is a question for Steve, since we have a legal and policy panelist, legal and policy organizations, and you do affordable housing. The question is, where are your affordable housing located?
You said where?
Yes, that's the
I mean,
question.
affordable housing in DC is, it's all over the country, I mean, all over the city, with the exception, there's probably not a high concentration in Ward 3. There's probably high concentrations of it in 7, 8, 5, and 1. But they're locators that you can use if you're looking for housing. There's a locator on the DHCD website. Maya, what do you want to say?
Called
dchousingsearch.org.
Can I ask you, so is that the district sanctioned, funded, codified search locator?
Yes.
And it's been, I guess,
Updated?
Abated. No, my question, I'm not thinking of the word. The word is, did the district give the coalition custody of that site?
No, we don't have custody of it, but we can be a resource. If you are actually looking for housing, we can connect you, not just with the website, but other services to locate it. I don't know if the context of the question was someone wanting to actually know about housing for themselves, or a broader question of where are we putting affordable housing in DC. I think that we have tried to make an effort that affordable housing would be broadly and generally located across the city. I think we've achieved some success, and I think we have some more work to do.
What about that new inclusion thing that people are getting?
Inclusionary zoning?
Yeah.
It's a program that's been in operation for a while. I would say mixed results, some challenges, and I think adjustments that need to be made in the program. I will just say this personally, one of the issues I've had with it is the ability to do off-site housing. The whole point of inclusionary zoning, for me at least, was that when we give prime land that's near amenities and transportation, that low-income people have the same access to those things. And if we're building the required units a mile away from those things, we haven't accomplished that part of it, but there are other challenges with it as well.
I see 2 hands raised. Can you hold those questions for the next panel, or is it a yes or no question? Thank you. And repeat the question, Steve.
The question was, how are we making nonprofit housing developers accountable for ensuring that their residents have decent, safe, and sanitary housing? I think it's, there is oversight requirements by our government to ensure that, and there are actions that tenants can take if they're not violations. I mean, if you want to know more, I would just say get your stuff from Maya, and I'm happy to have a lengthy conversation about that. It is kind of a streets to the suites kind of answer. There are some very primal things that tenants can do in terms of reporting and getting compliance, all the way up to legal actions that can be taken and so forth. I would say this, all of the nonprofit housing providers are members of the coalition. The majority of them hold it as their own value to have decent, safe, and sanitary housing. I know every one of them. I know that they have challenges, and we actually operate some initiatives to help with that. Small building fund, a landlord partnership fund, a senior home repair program, and more. But just connect with us, and we're happy to go deeper with you into, one, understanding your concern, and two, trying to connect you with information and resources that can address that issue.
Brief comment by Nicole.
Two additions. One, I would just say the new Office of Building Inspection, I'm going to get it wrong. Call for your own inspections if you are seeing issues. Demand your own inspections, because oftentimes folks are using private inspectors who will give them the score that they need. And secondly, AG Schwab has set up a tip line for tenants who are experiencing inhabitable conditions and other issues with their landlords. He's been an incredible advocate for tenants. Get involved with his office as well.
Thank you so much. This was truly an excellent panel. I learned a lot. I hope you did too. We're going to have a 15-minute break now for coffee and networking. Please, that's going to be in this room, so please stay in the room or don't go far. We will start promptly the second panel in about 15 minutes. Please help me thank these excellent panelists.
All right.